Because we're live. Welcome all to the second Sunday sermon of the coming Renaissance series. Greetings to you, wherever and whoever you are, on this evening of mankind, where we as yet not know when or whence another dawn and day may break. We stand, it seems, at an unprecedented juncture, where all of a sudden, everything seems to matter again, where, through the veil of horror, meaning begins to shine. Tonight, we shall concern ourselves with the question of all questions, the question of skole, true leisure, muse, as the Germans say. And skole is the ancient Greek word where you get the word school from. So school is supposed to be a place for leisure, not a place where you get credit points. Why is this the question of all questions? Because leisure is the basis of civilization. Athens was born, Plato tells us in his dialogue, on the basis of skole. When skole arrived in their midst, when the spirit of true leisure arrived in their midst. For then, the thoughts of Athenians had already turned to the plenty, the abundance of being, and of course, also to an appreciation of the old and their ancestors. But this, our age, as Goethe notices in his Maxims and Reflections, is unholy, since nothing is allowed to come into its own, nothing is allowed to ripen. A great forgetting set in centuries ago, and the reckoning has come. We have forgotten who we are. We who yet do not remember who we have always been. Goethe continues, quote, "The activity of commerce, the rush and rustle of paper money, the swelling up of debts to pay debts, all these are the monstrous elements, the unheimlichen Aspekte, the uncanny elements, the unhomely elements, that which makes us homeless, to which in these days a young man is exposed." End of quote. What is debt other than the utter abyss which sucks us empty and leaves our world voided of meaning? Usury, the existential trap, a tempocidal destruction of all genuine access to time and history, the freezing of our memory of who we are and have always been. What Goethe begins to see here is already what Heidegger will come to call the insatiable will to will, that wills evermore and can only give itself a ground if this will continues to will more at ever greater cost for all, and ever more force and greater effort, and ever smaller dividends and ever smaller yields. A tiredness has ruled us for long already, if we are honest to ourselves. A sluggish tiredness that masquerades as positive thinking, medially prescribed optimism, keeping calm and carrying on, hiding its frail nerves. A tiredness that portrays itself as strong-willed and forceful, but caves immediately when the subtle uncanniness of existence begins to spit at the empty, happy-go-lucky attitude we are forced to display. We live not in a polis, a proper city. No, that would be a mirror, or is a mirror, of the good order of the cosmos. We live not in a virtuous polis of fellow humans, but in an uncanny wheelwork, as Nietzsche calls our history of the next 200 years in an unpublished fragment. We exist in the grind of the, quote Nietzsche, total economic management of the earth. But Earth has begun to fight back. How sick and corrupt and anti-human is a system that collapses if the world stands still only for a couple of weeks? Who and what are these concealed gods many pray to and sacrifice for, unbeknownst to them? Is this a world fit for humans, where stillness is a sin? What we have forgotten is that what the Greeks called skole, the true spirit of leisure, muse, is not just some free time from work, which we are sometimes granted, if the powers that be allow us. And granted if and only if all basic needs are met, and if and only if we use this time to get fit again, to produce. No. As anyone who can see what drives this planetary uncanny wheelwork, the will to will that wills itself and wills itself so. Why? Because it is so. Anyone who sees this knows that never will all needs be met. For the will itself is lack, fundamental lack. Leisure does not come once all basic needs and wants and desires are met. Instead, leisure itself is the cradle of civilization, of the well-ordered polis. Our economic systems, whatever ism they may be, capitalism, socialism, communism, Keynesianism, whatever ism, are all predicated on fundamental lack and the need to fill all material needs. The planet has ground to a halt. Atlantis is sinking again. Plato tells us in his dialogue Critias that Atlantis, this most magnificent city of its time, Atlantis began to lose its ways when the Atlanteans directed their sense towards lack and then needed a continuous inflow of goods to still their insatiable appetites. Their harbor never stood still. It operated 24/7. The Atlanteans turned their days into a restless frenzy and their nights into days. An uncanny wheelwork, indeed. And if you allow me, I shall briefly refer again to Goethe, to his Maxime und Reflexionen, Maxims and Reflections, where he says, die Mängel erkennt nur der Lieblose, deshalb, sie einzusehen, muss man auch lieblos werden. Only the one who is without love sees that which is lacking. This is why one has to become loveless in order to see that which is lacking. In the same dialogue, also in Critias, Plato tells us how Athens became Athens, as I mentioned before. How the polis of the goddess Athene, the garden of Athens, the fruits of which we still enjoy today if we care to listen. Athenians, before they became who they were, directed their sense towards lack. Their nous was directed towards that which they didn't have. They had no room for a knowledge of the old, of that which has always been. They found no stance to take in the midst of beings, and skole was nowhere to be found. But once they directed their sense towards skole, towards the true spirit of leisure, they began to remember their future. They were able to remember who they had always been. Skole, the spirit of true leisure, entered their hearts, and they found the hold to ground the polis that became Athens, the true garden. With their sense directed at skole, their spirit filled with it, Athenians turned to what Plato calls in the Greek mythologia, mythology, the knowledge of the old. The old, as Aristotle tells us, is the name for being. Toti en einai, that which has always been, das sein, being, lessere. The question of being, which we are forgetting, is the reminder of who we have always been. But the will to will blinds our eyes and hearts for this deep memory and true innering, bringing into the inner of our hearts who we are. The will to will wills us to be enslaved by debt, numb from experiences and death machines. The will to will wills us to kill time rather than allowing for the wonders of boredom to disclose to us who we are. For it is in our epoch, only through the horror vacui, the horror of emptiness, that meaning can begin again to shine forth, directing our senses, again to skole, the spirit of true leisure. This directing, if this takes hold of us, then we are reminded of ancestors, of the old, of being, and only hence can houses fit for humans, an oikonomia, the law of an oikos, that does not destroy the earth, does not deplete meaning, does not use usury. It is then that we begin to dwell. As Heidegger says, genuine dwelling means to protect the earth, but does not mean to destroy the earth and search for the insatiable lust for fake comfort. We must begin, though, with thinking. Of course, now, more than ever, now, an obscene haste rules. More than before, perhaps, I think, to act. We need to act, we're being told, to find a cure, to establish a new order of the world. But thinking is what we must do. We must think. We who, as Aristotle says, are the zoon logon echon, the living being which holds itself in logos. That is the proper translation for this, not rational animal. We must gather ourselves to come to our senses, to the genuine human sense, the Menschensinn, which Goethe still remembers. And Goethe remembers also that all that is intelligent has already been thought. What we are to do at all times is to think again through the echoes of truth. Suddenly we are thrown back to ourselves, looking for a stance, for something to hold on to. We will not find it in an obscene haste. We might find a stance again if we begin to be idle with dignity, which is to say that we find our being human and what it means to be human only in this being suspended and the proper need to ground ourselves. Let me read a passage from Nietzsche's Fröhliche Wissenschaft, Gay Science, entitled in German Muße und Müßiggang, Leisure and Idleness. A passage I read this morning with a private student of mine, a wonderful passage. It's section 329 in the book. You should read it after this. And the Gay Science is the book that's already pregnant with Zarathustra, the prophet of the eternal recurrence, of the recurrence also of the tragic sense of what it means to be human. Here's Nietzsche. The breathless haste of America with which they work is already beginning to infect old Europe with its ferocity and is spreading a lack of spirituality, of Geistlosigkeit, of a lack of mind, of spirit, like a blanket. Even now, one is ashamed of resting, and prolonged reflection almost gives people a bad conscience. One thinks with a watch in one's hand, even as one eats one's midday meal while reading the latest news of the stock market. One lives as if one always might miss out on something. Rather do anything than nothing. This principle, too, is merely a string to throttle all culture and good taste. Just as all forms are visibly perishing, by the haste of the workers, and we are all workers. The feeling for form itself, the ear and eye for the melody of movements are also perishing. The proof of this may be found in the universal demand for gross obviousness in all those situations in which human beings wish to be honest with one another, for once in their association with friends, women, relatives, children, teachers, pupils, leaders, and princes. One no longer has time or energy for ceremonies, for being obliging in an indirect way, for esprit in conversation, and for any otium at all. Living in a constant chase after gain compels people to expend their spirit to the point of exhaustion in continual pretense and overreaching and anticipating others. Virtue has come to consist of doing something in less time than someone else. Hours in which honesty is permitted have become rare. And the German word here is Redlichkeit instead of honesties. Ehrlichkeit is honesty. Redlichkeit is not really honesty. Redlichkeit means that in a conversation, that which is being said, that which is being spoken, and the way it's being spoken is sincere and honest and genuine. So no more Redlichkeit in this sense, no more honesty in conversation. Hours in which honesty, Redlichkeit is permitted have become rare. And when they arrive, one is tired and does not only want to let oneself go, but actually wishes to stretch out as long and wide and ungainly as one happens to be. This is how people now write letters, and the style and spirit of letters will always be the true sign of the times. If sociability and the arts still offer any delight, it is the kind of delight that slaves, weary of the work, devise for themselves. How frugal our educated and uneducated people have become regarding joy. How they are becoming increasingly suspicious of all genuine joy. More and more, work enlists all good conscience on its side. The desire for joy already calls itself a need to recuperate and is beginning to be ashamed of itself. One owes it to one's health. That is what people say when they are caught on an excursion into the country. Soon we may well reach the point where people can no longer give in to the desire for a vita contemplativa, the contemplative life. That is, taking a walk with ideas and friends, and as Nietzsche says somewhere else, good thoughts only come when you walk, not when you sit, without self-contempt and bad conscience. End of quote. Without leisure, without idleness, no dignity, no humanity. We are spiritless, we are numb. There is no poetry in our world. All enjoyment is already only relaxation, as if we were an ox under a yoke. Let me say it more clearly, a castrated animal carrying a burden it does not see or know. The question of leisure and idleness, make no mistake, is not some question about what we do in our spare time or now that we are locked in. This is not to say true leisure just means to read some Aristotle now that we have some time to ourselves either. No, the question of skole properly and directly concerns itself with the question what it means to be human. To quote Ivo de Gennaro, to be human is not a fact, it is a job. To enter into the spirit of true skole, true leisure, means to begin to remember a future we have never known. And those of you who already are aware of Ivo de Gennaro, I will post my 4th conversation with him on the question of being and the origin of language in poetry on Tuesday evening, where we begin with a quote from Barnett Newman, the artist, who still knew that the human being is an artist first and foremost. In 1949, the German Catholic philosopher Joseph Pieper published an essay entitled in German Muße und Kult. Usually the title is translated in English as Leisure, the Basis of Culture. A bit of a whitewashed title. Unfortunately, something significant is lost in this translation. Muße is skole, the true spirit of foundational leisure. But kult means worship, cultus. Without the divine, we are only ever idolizing ourselves in a fake leisure. True ceremony is only possible with a view to the divine, with sacrifice. In his essay, Pieper remembers his readers of the grand tradition of the Occident, the land of dusk. das Abendland, of its contemplative caste, of those who by meditating and contemplation looked after that which is. People feared that we all would become but workers in a world of total work. He reminds his readers that those who pray to God before bedtime sleep better. But he also says that it would be absurd to assume that someone just prays in order to sleep better, as if praying were but self-idolatry of the human being. Little did he know that Meditation Inc. and Buddhism Inc. in all its various disguises, a few decades after his death, would offer just this newest insanity. What does it mean to meditate? We get the word medicine from meditare. One of the oldest sentences of Occidental wisdom comes from Periander. Melita tan pan. Take into care and consideration everything that is tan pan, beings in the whole. To meditate means to care for beings, deeply and profoundly. Meditating in order to perform better at whatever task is the utter voiding and desertification, Verwüstung, worse than destruction. It turns everything into a desert, of the meaning of meditation, and hence one of the pale horses on which nihilism has pillaged our lands and pastures. Let us begin again to direct our sense, unseren Menschensinn, our human sense, toward the spirit of true leisure, toward the plenty and fullness at the heart of things, the exuberance of being, the gift that comes to thinking, the gift that is thinking. For then can we remember what we have always already been and build toward a genuine future, not some fantasy. And perhaps you allow me to conclude tonight to mention that I will begin to teach an online course on the question of idleness with dignity. It'll be a 7-week course, 7 meetings, 7 online seminars. There should be a link somewhere down there. I'd like to thank you all very much for listening. I will be back live again next Sunday, very likely with a Memento Mori lecture, with a lecture on death and dying. And I hope that you keep well and stay well. And all the best to you and yours. Good night. Oh yeah, thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Socratic Skeptic. Thanks both. Awesome. Have a good week all. Thank you. Thank you, okay.